Hi, guys. Welcome to the podcast. You are in for a treat today because I am flipping the interview tables and having Julia Z. Patrick on my show. I have the privilege of being a co-host on her show, the nonprofit show, that you can catch. We'll put the show link in the notes, but you can catch that every single day. I can't believe she hosts a show for every single day, but she does, and it's an incredible one. Today we're talking about a topic. So Julia sent this topic over, and I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds interesting. Holy smokes. This is going to blow you away. I feel like this is A, something she's really schooled me on, B, something I really need to integrate into my advisory to my clients. And that topic is cultivating and captivating next gen board members. What does that look like? Why should we do that? How is a board member who might be, 70 years old different than somebody who is a millennial? And how are they working together? How do we do that? How do we attract them? How do we engage them? They need different things. And so this is really exciting as I think about, so many of the demographic shifts and people retiring and that wealth transfer. And like we have covered it all in this topic. And I've just loved it. And I think it's going to, if you put it through that fundraising filter, it's really going to be an interesting, eye-opening conversation about the network of your millennial board members or those next-gen board members. So Julia also mentions a book that she's just written, and so we're going to put that in the show notes. And so grab that. And it feels like a really easy read, practical, tangible things that you can take out of that and use today. So enjoy the conversation. Julia, thanks for being on my podcast.
I'm so excited. And because I love the idea of being the guest, because I'm a host every day.
Well, I was like, well, tables have turned. Tables have turned here.
I'm like, I hope I'm a good guest.
You're a great guest. You're a great guest. I will tell you, this is the least, or the podcast that I've prepped for the least, because I'm like, oh, well, I'm just talking to Julia. So I feel like this will be a fun conversation. But here, okay, so you know how oftentimes when we do speaking engagements, I don't know sometimes if you feel like they read our bio and it just feels like, man, my bio's long. I need to. I felt like that would be with everything you do. I was like, wait, American Nonprofit Academy, nonprofit show, your book, your consultancy, your board training. I felt like I was at risk of being that person. And so before we jump into our topic today, which is cultivating and captivating next gen board members, love that topic.
Thank you.
Tell me, Julia, walk us through your, in a few lines, not a 10-minute description, but your, like, who is Julia Patrick? All the things you're doing, what you love to do. I have such the privilege of being this rotating co-host on your super fun show, the nonprofit show. I always look forward to it when I see it on my calendar the next day. But just give us your, in a nutshell, just your journey in the sector and what you're doing today.
Wow, thank you. I'm very honored to be here. I know how hard this work is, Sherry, and I know people think, oh, it's just so easy. I'll just do a little podcast, but it's not. Right. And it's arduous, and it's something that you have to think about and you have to execute. And there's a reason why on average, most podcasters can't get through 10 episodes because they just can't do it. And so I really want to start off by saying I appreciate this. I'm very, very fortunate. I grew up and continue to live in the same community where I was born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona, now the 5th largest city in America, but a very new city. And we were, the state of Arizona was only 150 years ago a part of Mexico.
That's wild.
I know, it is. And especially for you coming from Chicago, where 150 years is like a blink of an eye,
right?
I mean, we were a pioneer, and we still are a pioneer environment. And so philanthropy was a big part of my culture because I grew up on a dirt road. It's hard to believe, in the center of the city. I mean, we didn't have libraries. We didn't have hospitals. Wow. Mothers that had babies, taught the oldest boys in the neighborhood how to drive that extra truck to get to a doctor or a hospital. All boys learned that because
Wow.
we were in the West. And yet, college educated, professional people. My grandfather was a banker. My
Wow.
dad was in commercial real estate. But we had this ethos and we had this environment where we were still building.
Hmm.
And so a part and parcel to that is that we had fundraisers out the wazoo. I mean, it was like, because we didn't have things. We
Everybody's
didn't have,
mobilizing to get needing money for something. Yeah.
yeah. And then, you had the national ecosystem. From my grandparents, it was World War II. From my parents, it was the scourge of polio and
Mm.
vaccinating kids. And I went to school on what they call double sessions because we didn't have enough school buildings. So we had to run double sessions with like two schools in one. There was a morning session and an afternoon
Wow.
session. And we didn't know any better, but there's so many of these things I could talk to you about. I mean,
Yeah.
the Phoenix Symphony, which is a renowned symphony, played in the Phoenix Union High School until I was almost a teenager, right?
Your high school.
Not my high. I went to
Oh,
Scottsdale High, but it was Phoenix Central Union
right there.
downtown.
Yeah.
But I mean, so I could go on and on and on and on and on about this, and because of that, it was always a part of our ecosystem,
Yeah.
right? It wasn't just well-to-do folks or the community leaders. It was everyone.
Yeah.
And so as I grew up and I got to see and witness and participate in this amazing community of ours, I learned that there were some real pitfalls, and you
Mm.
could have the best intentions of all time, but if you couldn't understand how to lead or participate or strategize, you weren't going to get to where you wanted to be.
Right. Right.
And I'm not talking about the sexy, glittery things. I'm talking
Sure.
about hospitals and schools attracting doctors to come bring their families and live here,
Yeah.
attracting educated people to come and work here, build businesses,
Yeah.
get active in politics. I mean, it's been a real booster environment. Part and parcel to that, I became a publisher, a newspaper publisher, and I was a newspaper publisher for 30 years.
Wow.
And at one point in my life, as I was entering my mid 50s,
Your younger years.
my younger years, I was like, okay, I don't need to be the pretty girl at the gala anymore. I
Yeah.
need to be like, get off the rubber chicken circuit, which I'm still on,
Yeah.
but
We all are.
yeah, you know what I'm talking about. And so I decided that I was going to dedicate the rest of my life to the nonprofit sector in a way that was more meaningful to me.
Mm.
And so it was quite controversial. My family was like, "You're going to hate it." And I was like, okay, maybe I will. So I sold my last publications and really entered into a period of my life where I could give my observations, build connectivity, and share my wisdom for good or for bad. And so I'm not a consultant as much as I am somebody who leads within the sector. And then a funny thing happened. I started picking up speaking engagements and I loved it. And I was doing
Right.
trainings and blah, blah, blah. And then this wackadoo thing called COVID came. And all of my national speaking opportunities and trainings and personal engagements and
Right.
coaching just died.
Gone.
And I had always had a studio because of my publishing business. We were a newspaper business, but we had an online component with video. And so I was like, if you remember, March of 2022 was like a Thursday, and the government was like, we need to,
Yes.
shut down and all this. And so I was like, let's do a show. It was like Judy Garland, Mickey Rooney, my dad's got a barn, let's put on a show. Man. And that Monday,
Here we
I had
go.
a show. And so now I'm in my 5th year, coming up on 1,200 episodes.
That's wild.
It is wild because I was the super smart girl that was like, 2 weeks, we'll be over and we'll be back to life.
Oh, I was too. I didn't start a podcast during those 2 weeks, but I was also saying we were going back in 2 weeks.
Well, listen, it's been the hardest thing
Or
I've
a
ever
show.
done.
Yeah.
The show. It's been really hard. I was not trained to do this. My life has been the written word, and the graphic word, like how it looks on
Yes.
paper and print.
Yes.
Have a face for radio, as they say. I'm an older woman. It was not anything that was natural, and nor is it to this day. It's not
Mm,
natural. I love to chit chat. I love my energy that I get from you and my time with you. But I'm probably better if I'm typing with you or
yeah.
texting with
Writing.
you
Yeah.
as opposed to this. And so it's been a challenge, but every day I get to talk with somebody from around the world
Right.
and learn. And it's
Oh
what
my
could be
gosh.
better.
Oh
What
my
could be
gosh.
better?
Well, I feel like, so I've never heard that story. And I
Yeah.
feel like we know each other. So
Yeah.
that's so inspiring to me and actually is connecting a lot of dots for you, Julia Patrick. Um, but I also feel like, I don't know, the first time I was on a nonprofit show, but yet, honestly, it felt like you probably were doing it for 5 years, but I think it was in 2020. And
Oh, it was
so,
brand new.
yeah, I
Oh
know,
yeah.
but it felt like
Yeah.
you were just riding a bike. Here we go. And there was just a great energy that I thought, oh my gosh, this is fun. It's quick. It's a snapshot. And it's natural and you're really good at it. So congratulations on the consistency of doing something like that. Cause I'm always impressed where I'm like, I don't want to be on Zoom on a Friday. And you were, yeah, every single day you are on the show. So
Yeah.
kudos to you for that.
Thank you. It's, I have to say that I'm so humbled by the things that I learn and the people that
Mm,
I'm around. They are the best of all of us,
yeah.
and you are one of those people, Sherry. I mean, and so when I feed off of that, I
Mm,
leave every episode with this, like, it sounds hokey, but it's like I've gone to church, right?
yeah.
Your temple
Yeah.
or synagogue, where I've been in front of amazing thought leaders that take me out of my, you know, me problems,
Yeah.
and doing things that are really important that
Yeah.
make my life better. And so
Yeah.
they might be working out of Cincinnati, Ohio, but something that they do makes my life better.
Yeah.
And so that is not lost on me. And so
Mm,
the privilege of being around these folks, it's amazing. I mean, if you could get this gig, I would advise it.
yeah. So
Because
good.
it's
So
stunning.
good. Keep it
It's
going. Keep it going.
Well, thank you. And it does. I do want to keep going, and at
Mhm.
some point, I won't. I'll move this to somebody else to let them, carry it down the rest of the field. But there's so much amazing things,
Yeah. We have a lot of
amazing.
stories to tell at the end of the day.
Yeah, and so it's really good. So, for me,
Good.
I think that that's kind of where we are, and what we see.
I love it. I love it. Okay, so talk to me. So we're talking boards today. Help me
Mhm.
transition this, Julia. So have you just loved that element of the leadership of a nonprofit and like I mean, you've really, this has been a topic that I just think you've kind of taken and really, really
Yeah.
made your own. And so I know we're talking about cultivating and captivating next gen
Yeah.
board members. But I do find that people on our side of the world either love working with boards or hate working with boards. Um, I think you're the love. So
I
I'm anxious to talk
do.
about just your work with boards.
I do love working with boards, and I have been privileged to serve on boards that were amazing,
Mm,
and I worked on boards that weren't.
yeah,
And the difference is stunning.
yeah.
I've been married to the love of my life for almost 50 years. But
Congratulations.
well, thanks. But it's like talking to women who've been in bad marriages, and then they get into a good marriage, and they're like, I never knew it could be like this.
This is what it is. Yeah,
This
that is
is what
hilarious.
it's a horrible, horrible line to draw. But I swear to God, it's been like that for me
Yeah.
in my board service. And so, um, and it's not a function of what the mission is. And that's what's so
Hmm.
tragic to me is that
Yes.
you can be doing the work of the angels, but if you don't have a board structure
Yes.
that's functioning, then it's just, as we say in my community, it's no que bueno.
Yeah.
So we need to be working on this. We have 1.8 million registered nonprofits in this
Yeah.
amazing country of ours, and they all have to have boards. And
Yeah.
so, they're non-paid, they're volunteers, they're people doing other things. And so it's really important. And then, Sherry, we have this thing that's occurring in the demographics of our own nation, and that's an aging population.
Right.
And so we don't have the luxury of not only figuring out how to make our boards work, but how to get that next generation involved, how to
Yeah.
get this next gen up. And they work differently. They
Hmm.
think
I'm seeing
differently.
that. I totally
Yeah.
agree.
Yeah.
I love you told me you call it the silver tsunami of board member
Mhm. Yeah.
retirements. Okay, so talk to me about like
Yeah.
what you're seeing. What are those major demographic shifts?
Mhm.
Like what is the landscape right now you're seeing?
So one of the most interesting things is that, the baby boomers are aging out. And when we say
Hmm.
aging out, it means two things. They're retiring and they're passing away. So
Hmm.
when they retire, they're taking with them all of their knowledge, intent, and connectivity.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are wanting to move into volunteer work. And that's like a second act for them. And a lot of times in the nonprofit sector, we call that second actors, right?
Yes.
They,
Right.
they move through, and which is great. And it causes some other issues, but it's great. The other part of this is with the passing and literally the life cycle of that demographic is that we're now experiencing the greatest transference of wealth in our nation. And so it is, depending on who you listen to, it's between 30 and 90 trillion dollars. And that's movement because wealth shifts.
Of
And we've
course.
built a lot of wealth in this country, lately. And so it's a fascinating thing. And so now you have this socioeconomic shift on top of everything else. But the biggest thing is that we have this millennial workforce, now close to 45%, and some will say 50% of the workforce is millennial. And so it's a different mindset. It's a wealth, transference benefactor or beneficiary. And it's also the most educated
Mm.
demographic that we've ever had in the history of our nation.
Wow. Wow.
Also the demographic that has the most educational debt.
Hmm.
And
Ugh,
so it
of course,
changed.
right? Ugh,
Yeah, of course. And so it changes what they're investing in. And they're also digitally native, right?
yes.
And so
Yes.
they expect things differently and they work differently and they think differently. And this is where I see the problems. We are not, the older board member has never given any credence to somebody in
Hmm.
their 30s, let alone their 40s. One
Yes.
of my favorite clients is a national trade organization. Very, very important. They are attached to the financial sector, and they are a profoundly important part of our economy. And they bring me in and they have me go around the country to work with groups
Nice.
about how to build next gen boards. And when I talk, they're always like, Julia, you're what we need, and I'm like, and because their average age of their board member is pushing 80.
I was going to say 75, but it's 80.
80. 80.
Wow.
And I'm
Wow.
like, at 63, I'm
Yep.
past.
Yeah.
You should be moving me off.
Totally.
People like me moving me up. 40s, 30s,
Wow.
50s, okay.
Yeah. You know what? I feel like what I see, like I see this, I see this, it's not a trend. It's like I've been seeing this forever, but it's like, okay, here's our board, our big board, and it's all that age demographic.
Hmm.
And so, oh, we'll just start like a junior board. And it used to be
Yeah,
the junior boards, even 10 years ago, were like
yeah,
the 20 somethings, newbies in the
right,
office.
right,
And now, like, it's up to 40 something being the junior board.
right.
Those are regular board members. And so I'm like, I still am just sitting here thinking, why do we decide to do two? Because
Yeah.
it's like somehow they weren't worthy to give input into the big
Right.
board. But now there's this gap, and there's less expectations from of
Right.
like, well, they shouldn't be able to have to raise as much because they're young in their career.
Right.
They're doing well. Like these are our millennials, right?
They're making more money than we are.
I
We, out the
know.
gate, out the gate. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
my first job out of college, which I was considered a high flyer from my school. I think my salary was 18,000.
High
And I,
flyer.
yeah. And I remember like people in the administration were like, how in the hell did you get that job? You know, and now my child out of college, pushed to a
Totally
number,
different. Yeah.
yeah, that would have taken me like 10 years to get
Right.
to, right? So, long story short, this is a different time. And
Yeah.
and what I'm finding, I did a board kickoff last night for a national
Mm.
organization, like a rah-rah inspirational kind of thing. And they were just fascinated about how they had stopped thinking about their own replacements.
Hmm.
They were thinking about like how do we get our board to be working better. And I was like, well, part of that is the next gen.
Yes.
Who's up?
Yes.
If we were a baseball team, your whole group would not be the only ones on the field. You'd have
Absolutely.
that backup bench, we call it the bench,
Mm-hmm.
and they'd be trained and they'd be healthy and they'd be ready to go and they would know the plays
Yep.
so that they could get up to bat and start working for you. And
Yeah.
then
Love
this
it.
board was just like, oh crap. I could just see it in their faces.
Yes. You're like, great.
Yeah, yeah. And so
Oh
we
my
in our
goodness.
in our book, Building Board Champions, we created and we did this, Sherry. We probably created this 15 years ago,
Mm.
like a board assessment and cultivation piece. And it's like
Yeah.
what you need, what you have, what you're gonna need, and it's everything from it's not like gender and age. It's like what part of the community do you live in? Do you
Right.
speak a
Right.
different language? Can you speak on camera? What are your connections like?
Mm.
I mean, it goes on and on and on. I mean, do you have a financial background? Do you have an accounting background? Do you have
Right.
social services? It goes into all these things because for the most part, boards have been formed by that guy's a great guy. He's at my club. I'll just ask
Yes.
him, when we're playing golf.
Yeah. Yep. We got to raise our sights on this.
Yeah.
Um, you mentioned, I mean, like even like the example of, oh my gosh, and those millennials, so many of them have debt, so then they
Yeah.
want to invest in different types of missions.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about how next gen board members really do view philanthropic service.
It
Um,
is, yeah, it's a
yeah,
huge question. And I think it's really one of my most favorite things, because it is so different
mm,
than what we are expecting of our board members. And the first thing is that they are not charitable people. They are very empathetic. But when I say they're not charitable, it means they're not just going to give money because that's the right thing to do.
right.
They want impact. And so what happens, and I think this is really exciting for our country and
Hmm.
really exciting for our sector, they'll be like, yeah, no kid should be hungry at school. That's not right.
Right.
Versus, well, kids are going to be hungry at school and that's a bummer.
Yeah.
We got to help who we can. Millennials and these next gen leaders are like, screw that. What's the
Yeah.
solution?
Right.
They
Right.
are used,
Action.
yeah, and they know that you can find a solution where people my age are like, well, yeah, that's tough. We got to help who we can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Versus this group is like, okay, you can't learn if you're hungry. Okay, you can't build a strong body if you're not
Hmm.
healthy. You can't do all these things predicated back on this foundational moment. And
Right.
so you get board leaders that are much more strategic, much more cause and effect oriented,
Mm.
not just, hey, everybody, we need to raise money, right?
Yes.
They're like,
Yes.
what are we going to do with it?
Ugh. And it's like, I think of the question I get all the time is how do I get my board to be more involved, care more? It's like, well, you're describing actually that type of board member that we need to open the doors to and bring that mix in.
Yeah. So, perfect example. I go last night to this swanky event to do this board kickoff. Um, and it was lovely. I mean, it was lovely. But I looked around and I asked them, this particular organization had 9 campuses.
Hmm.
And I said, why aren't we at one of your campuses? We could have had a catered dinner. It could have been just as lovely. But when we sit here in this rarefied air, we're not connecting to your mission.
Wow.
And they were kind of like,
You're
I'm
laying the
sure,
law yesterday.
I'm sure they were like, wow, she's a total wench. And I am. I own it. But you know what I'm saying? I'm like,
Yeah.
we um we don't do the right thing by engaging folks where we work.
Mm.
In my book, we call it dog fooding.
Mm.
There's a lot to it, but it's a foundational moment in time where we make the decision to bring people into where we're working, and it's
Yes.
not always beautiful, right?
Right. We're in the kitchen sometimes.
Yeah, we're in the kitchen. I
Hmm.
love that. I
Yeah.
love that. And but when you're in the kitchen, don't you appreciate the food more?
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, you're like, holy cow, it took her 30 minutes to dice up all those vegetables,
Absolutely. Because
right?
anybody can order takeout, you know?
Right.
Okay, so you mentioned your book. We're going to put the book link in the show notes.
Mhm.
We'll talk a bit about that. So I'm feeling, sometimes I hear people say they're struggling to find next gen leaders or younger people who would want to do board service. Do you see that, or do you agree with that?
No, I think the biggest thing is fear.
Mm.
I'm a big believer that nobody wants to sign up and fail, that they want to participate and they want to be
Yeah.
impactful. But what happens is if something's not going right, or there's fear, or they're not well trained, then they disengage.
Mm.
And then
Yep.
disengagement builds failure. So I'm a big proponent of board training, understanding the board members understanding what goes on. You know, I'm stunned at the number of board members that don't really know what the organization does.
Oh, I know.
Haven't,
I know.
and I mean, in the beginning of my board service, which I was a young woman, I tell a story in the beginning of my book that I was really excited. I was in my 30s. I was asked to join this very prestigious board, and I had my Sally Fields moment where they're like, "You really love me. You love me. You really love me." You know, when she accepted her Oscar. I'm dating myself. And then I went to my first board meeting in this beautiful, rarefied conference room at the biggest um, law firm in our city, and blah blah blah. And 3 people asked me who who I brought and how I'd gotten there, and I was like, I drove myself. And then I didn't get it. And then the second board meeting, it happened again. Like, who did I bring? And I was like, I didn't bring anyone. And then I realized they thought I was like a caretaker or a granddaughter, or that I had brought the real board member, the real trustee, that I was
What?
a trustee. So a couple things there. I wasn't introduced.
Of course.
I introduced myself, Julia Patrick, but there was a disconnect from that board. And at the
Yes.
time, there was a board member who was, I think, 91, 92, a lovely, super cool woman, good to go. But, I was in my 30s. And
Right.
so I had a totally different environment and parameter for how I wanted to be of service. And so I
Wow.
think that's what we have with this next gen group. Remember, let's go back to that one point. They're the most educated demographic in our nation.
Mm.
And so they are used to getting knowledge. They're
Right.
not like my generation. We're like, God, thank God I'm over with school.
You're so
Do,
right.
I never have to do that again. They're like
Yes.
seekers. They're knowledge seekers, whether it be on YouTube, in person, whatever.
Yeah.
They are knowledge seekers. So they want to get training and they want to know how to be effective. They're not just going to show up and sit there.
Oh my
You know,
gosh.
and so it's a different ecosystem. Now, part and parcel of this is that they're going to leave if it's not working.
Yes.
They're going to leave. They're not going to
They
sit
don't have
and
time for
suffer
that.
in silence. I mean, think about the job market. You know, this next demographic, if they stay longer than 7 years at a job, they perceive it as being stagnant.
Hmm. It's a lifetime, right?
Yeah.
Julia, okay, you've like kind of, I've had a little aha moment here of, I'm always talking about boards fundraising. I don't touch the
Mhm.
governance and that kind of stuff,
Mhm.
but I always say, oh, the biggest quality of your board member when it comes to fundraising is I want them to be a learner. Like, why is this so, like, you're a lawyer,
Mhm.
a doctor, business person, finance, or attorney. You don't know how to fundraise, so I need you to be a learner on how to do relational fundraising as opposed to
Right.
collecting auction items.
Right.
And you just saying like, yeah, but the millennial person actually is a learner.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, because I actually am talking to that older board member who, well, I'm not doing it that way. That doesn't make sense. And I'm like having this moment of, having such a diversified board from an age standpoint would help that learning attitude, which is critical for all of us in all areas of life. I'm just having a moment here that I'll give you credit for when you see it on a LinkedIn post.
Yeah. No, and Sherry, I think that's one of the really good messages about this next gen leadership. In that, in my generation, I think we rolled our eyes a lot at our elders. We'd be like, "Oh my God, they're so out of touch. They're not educated. They're like old." As my mother would say, that stinking thinking.
Yeah.
They're not up with it. But this was so fascinating. Next gen, specifically millennials, they love wisdom.
Hmm.
Think about it. They have pillows and signs all over their house with like little quips.
Yes.
They want to be with their grandparents. They want to be with their parents. They weren't necessarily, they didn't have that luxury growing up because they had
Yes.
working two sets of parents, right? So
Right.
that ability to get that knowledge and that wisdom, and they are much more forgiving. We don't all have to agree. Where I
Mm-hmm.
think in previous generations, it was like, it's my way or the highway. We used
Yeah.
to say that all the time. And then we
Yeah.
would audit ourselves. We wouldn't say certain things at the dinner table because our elders didn't agree. And
Right.
now it's a different way. And it's so much better for our country and for our
Yeah.
civil society if we can get
Yes.
back to that behavior more. And so I think that along with, the messaging of this is a workforce ready to serve.
Yes.
They grew up serving. I mean, I'm sure you saw this with your girls' schooling, is that they probably had very specific days or times when they were
Yep.
expected to volunteer, and then they had
Yep.
to come
Required
back and
hours.
report. Yeah.
Yep. Even
And
in
I mean,
college, they do.
oh, and for degrees as part
Yes.
of your degree. Well, that never existed in my time.
Never did that ever.
No, I mean,
Oh
we
my
volunteered
goodness.
because that was a family cultural thing, but
Yeah.
there was no requirement. That was never reported out. And so
Yeah.
we have this group of educated, funded, you know, spiritually ready to lead in service, if you will.
Yes.
And we're not addressing it.
Yeah. Um, what's your advice for a leader who, I'm sitting here, I've got a board of 15 people who are, I'll say 65 and up.
Mhm.
Um, like, what's your advice on where to start here? Like, it's like one thing to keep them engaged, which we'll move into
Mhm.
talking about, but like, where are we
Mhm.
finding them? How are
Mhm.
we saying, hey, can you be the first one in? Because
Yeah.
we really know we need to change this. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just curious, like, practically.
So I go back to my wonderful grandmother Patrick, and I came home from school one day, and I went over to her house, and I was like, "Grant," she's like, "How was your day?" And I'm like, "Oh, the boys at Scottsdale High are the worst. They're dorks.
I've
And
heard
I
that
need a
in Scottsdale.
boyfriend."
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, they're dorks. I need a boyfriend. And my grandmother was like, "Well, what are you doing about it?" And I'm like, "I'm complaining to you." And she's like,
Yeah.
"Well, that's not going to cut it, sister." So she said, "You need to tell." And this is hilarious,
Oh
but
my
it's
gosh.
so damn true. She's like, "You need to tell 3 people a week that you're looking for a boyfriend." And I was like, "Well, I sure as hell can't do that." And she goes, "Well, then you're just going to be coming over to my house, instead of going to the sugar bowl and getting an ice cream after school, right? And so I was like, okay, you got a point. So the thing is, I
This is
always
your
think of it,
pipeline, your boyfriend pipeline.
it's true. It's true. And I think about this, Sherry. I think about this because I think you can go back out there into your community and say, I'm looking for somebody who speaks Spanish to be on my board because we serve a Spanish speaking population and our board are all Blancos who don't speak
Yeah,
Spanish.
yeah,
Or we need somebody who, is suffering from this ailment that we are fighting. We need somebody who lives on that part of town or in this part of the region. And you've got to be going out there and tapping people on the
yeah,
shoulder and building connections.
yeah.
And I tell
Intentional.
you, it really, really works. And because if you sit in silence, no one's ever going to know. They're going to think, oh my God, that's a high performing board. They don't need
Yeah,
me.
they don't need me.
So three
Um,
people a week
did you
and
find
a
a
new
boyfriend?
boyfriend.
Did you find a boyfriend for the Sugar Bowl?
I did.
Okay.
And it was like the big family scandal because he went to the private Catholic boys' school. And
Oh.
I remember I told my dad, and I'm dating and I'll say it on air, I'm dating a brophy boy. And he said, well, what did he get into trouble for? Because only troubled boys go to private Catholic school. And then ultimately I would have a child and she would go to the matching private Catholic girls' school. So it
Wait,
all
this is who you married?
no, I didn't marry him. I didn't marry him.
Oh, oh, okay. I was like, this is the husband of 50 years. I was thinking, like, this is the story of the century.
No, 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 no.
I love it. I
But
love it. I
no,
love it.
but it's true. I think that you can call it manifestation, but I think it's basic communication. And now
Yes.
we have this ability, we should all be on LinkedIn, going out and running these board surveys and telling your board members, hey folks, we're looking for, and be specific,
Yes.
a female that speaks Vietnamese, who lives in the central part of our city, who has a degree in finance or accounting.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty damn
Set your
specific.
intention. Yeah. I
So,
love it. Okay, so we attract them. We get that Vietnamese speaking person living in the southwest part of the city. You talked a little bit about them wanting to continually be learners. How do we keep them engaged? How do we keep them, and I guess inspiring the rest of the
yeah.
board if that's needed? And how are we kind of like using, I don't know, data and metrics and kind of moving the needle on this?
So you said the word, it's data and metrics.
Mm,
So back in my day, in early days of board service, we started with what we called a mission moment. And it was
yes.
kind of, I always called it the kiss and cry moment, right? Where we would bring somebody in and they would tell you the sob story. And we still do this. And you see this in the rubber chicken circuit, which I call the rubber chicken circuit, the
You can.
breakfast, lunch, and dinners where we're
You can.
fundraising and all that.
Yeah.
And it's that, oh my God, Chris Farley, I lived in a trailer down by the river,
Yeah.
right? And have pity on me and give me your money. And that's
Oh,
not
my
going to,
word.
well, but you know what I'm saying?
I do.
That's not going to cut it. With
Mm,
this new demographic, it's going to be, we served this many meals at our shelter and we saved our government this much money and we kept people out of homelessness. We solved this scourge. It's the metrics and the data points that they are going to be engaged with. And so this is where it gets a little tricky because the older folks are like, okay, that's just a number and it's like numbing me.
yes.
And that's not charitable. It's not striking at my heart.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? This strikes at the heart of that demographic.
Yes.
It
This is that
means
investment
something to
level
them.
conversation. Like I just, it's wild.
Yeah. So we need to be thinking that way.
I love it. And do you know the other thing? I'm having so many aha moments. Think of the LinkedIn post I'm going to write from this podcast.
I love
Here's
your LinkedIn post.
here's what I'm thinking though. So I'm thinking corporate sponsorships even.
Mm-hmm.
And the traditional old model is like golf outing, you want to be gold, silver, bronze. And so let's go take it to the corner office, which is the older person who says silver because we want to be charitable.
Right.
And now I'm thinking And I'm always like,
Mhm.
they don't, what do they even get for that? I don't know, whatever. But now I'm thinking, okay, wait, now those people are retiring.
Mhm.
Next level, next gen is coming
Yeah,
in,
yeah,
and we are still going to them with
yeah.
the golf sponsorship of gold, silver, bronze, and can't figure
Mhm.
out why they don't want to do it. When they
Right,
say, but we actually have a value to invest in the Vietnamese population in the southwest corner. And so we actually want to be involved. And then organizations are like, but did you want gold, silver, or bronze?
right.
I am like, oh my goodness, I'm just seeing that trickle down.
So my biggest thing is on corporate sponsorships, and I swam in that environment for years, being in publishing,
Oh, I bet.
because I was asked morning, noon, and night,
Yeah.
to be a media partner. Quick story: my child came home from kindergarten, like the first or second week, and she had a note pinned to her, and one of the other mothers had pinned a sponsorship request
On
on
her
her
shirt?
shirt, and she was like, she thought she was in trouble, and I'm like,
Oh,
you're not in trouble, that mom is in trouble. Never touch my child for a pitch. But
yeah.
anyway, so I know this, but you know what I tell folks, Sherry, is I think turn it back around, and I'll go back to my domestic violence. 1 in 4 women will experience domestic violence
Hmm.
in their lifetime. 1 in 4.
That's bonkers.
And if you have a female employee base, add that up.
Right.
How many of your own employees are facing domestic abuse?
Yeah.
I mean, how many of your employees are dealing with cancer or children with a neurological disorder,
Right.
from autism to whatever? I mean, I think there's a case to be made, especially in this tight labor market, which is another whole issue. Corporate America is trying to retain is a sanitized word. They're trying
Mm.
to hold on to their employees because
Yeah.
they know the cost of
Yes.
replacing them is devastating.
Yeah.
So how does that corporate sponsor look at what the issue is?
Yes.
I know that you can draw lines to that. I
Yes.
know
Yep.
you can engage your population or your cause to that population. You just
Yes.
have to stop and think.
Yes. And turn off, like, just push pause on autopilot and let's
Yeah,
just think through this.
yeah,
So
yeah,
good.
yeah.
Um, so a number of times you've brought up your book.
Mhm.
Talk to me about why now you wrote the book. I'm just curious to, like, times people say you should write a book. I'm like, I'll just stay over on LinkedIn. But I'm just curious, like, did you love it? Like, tell us about the book. Tell us, where people can find it, all the things. I'm just curious about your journey with it.
Well, I've been a professional writer all my life because I've been in publishing.
Yeah. It's a
I'm an
natural extension, I would think.
Yeah, I'm an award-winning published author. But you know what? I wrote for a newspaper, so it was short and sweet. And if
Right.
it was crap, next day, next week, next
All right,
month, it was
another.
out.
Yeah.
And I always used to say I would write for my mother because I knew my mother would read it. Not, I didn't care about anybody else.
Yeah.
And then we were on to the next thing. I had to write on deadline. Not always the greatest writer, but I could crank it out. I
Yeah.
still can crank it out. A book, holy moly, completely different.
Whole nother level.
You think about, I think about my mother reading it. Okay, yeah. But then all the other people, and you can't be like, oh, well, next week, don't worry, there'll be another newspaper or another,
Right.
article. It's there. And so
Right.
for me, I didn't figure that out until I was like in it. And then I'm like, oh my God, this is like really hard. And and in my newspaper business, I always had about 15 employees. I had my own editors, I had my own graphics and layout department and all that. Not so much with the
Oh,
American
I'm that
mom.
person? Yeah.
Yeah, so I was like, oh my God. And for anybody that says, oh, well, you're a writer, you can crank this out, it's a different
Mm,
mentality.
yeah.
And so I'm really challenged. I've been challenged by it. It was really hard, but really exciting. I haven't been great at promoting it or selling myself on it because that just seems uncomfortable.
Mm,
So that has been a learning experience.
yeah.
I've started with groups that hire me or bring me in to talk. And this is just like, to me, so ballsy, but I've been like, yeah. And part of it is you have to buy my book for every one of your
There we go.
people. And everybody's like, okay, no problem. And I'm like, what? You know what I mean?
Is this a thing? Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, so I have to say, I really, um, it's a very easy pick up, put down book. It's designed for people that find themselves in board leadership, and who have a passion, but maybe they see things around them that aren't working, but they can't
Mm,
identify it. And you know, Sherry, it's not like brain surgery. Some of it's just very, very simple. It's about
yeah.
50 activations that they can take before a meeting, or maybe it's more of an investment. Maybe it's more strategic.
Sure.
And so it's been a lot of fun. At last night, like I said, I was doing a board kickoff, and I looked around the room, and I had signed copies, and they were put at everybody's place
Yep.
setting. And I looked, and people were looking through it and, you know,
Oh,
looking at the activations and then asking questions about certain things. And so for
that
me,
feels good.
it does. It's really, it's very emotional
Mm,
because it's a validation of,
yeah.
you know, how I was raised and how I've raised my child. And um, so it's kind of otherworldly for
Yeah.
me.
Good for you.
Um, but I'm working on my second book, and it's
Holy
all
moly.
about how to launch a nonprofit. And
Oh.
spoiler alert, it's not going to be 100% encouraging.
I was just going to say, is there a chapter about when you shouldn't?
There are a lot of chapters about that.
Okay.
We're creating a really interesting, we haven't named it yet,
Mm,
but we're creating an interactive test that you can come on to our site and take, and it will measure you for the probability of success.
oh, wow.
Yeah.
Love
Yeah.
that. Like a
And
survey in essence, or some sort of
it's a
form.
measurement.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Measurement
yeah.
tool.
It'll be an online testing tool. But, you know, I think the thing of it is in America, we are so enamored. Well, it's hardwired into us, this entrepreneurial spirit and can do, and we can solve things. And so the concept of doing the work of the angels, we'll start a nonprofit and people will give us money and we'll solve this problem, is very genuine. But
Yes.
unfortunately, it's misguided.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so that's
Yeah.
my biggest
That's
two
cool.
questions. Yeah, board stuff, number one. Number two, can I take you to coffee and pick your brain about starting a nonprofit?
Mm, yes. I hear
And
you. I hear
you
you. I love it. I'm sending everybody your way on that topic. Oh my
know,
goodness. Julia, thank you for being on my show.
thank you. I just adore you. I think you're a national treasure. I think you're
Mm,
just I'm so grateful that you are in this sector. I know your work is really important to so many people. And, you know, Sherry, I think you do work that will impact people that you will never know. And to
mm,
me, that's the best way to lead a life, right?
wow.
And
Thank
that's,
you.
yeah, it's really a cool thing.
I hope so. And I
I
love
know
it. You
so.
know, it's like it's a win-win because I really do love what I do.
Yeah.
I'm excited to like, I just remember not years, but like there were like, oh, it's Sunday night, I gotta go to work. Like I get excited to sit at my desk on a Monday. I really do. I don't have those Sunday dreads because I learn so much from my clients, and I hope they learn the same amount from me. So thank you. That's nice
Yeah.
of you.
No,
What's the best? Yeah. What's the best way for people to find you, Julia? Where should they go?
you know, you can visit me on the American Nonprofit Academy.com site. You can go to the nonprofitshow.com website. You can even go to buildingboardchampions.com website. LinkedIn, you can find the
All the
book on
places.
Amazon. Yeah, you know,
Good. We'll put all those links in though.
you can find me. I'm around, and I'm very grateful that you have given me this opportunity, Sherry. Thank you.
Thank you.